Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming in tonight. My name is Joff Pedretti. For those that don't know me, I've been doing this 10 years to $10,000 an hour for a few years now. This is probably the sixth or seventh in the series. And before I go into our finance the deal here, I just wanted to talk a little bit about about myself, just because I think some people get the impression that, okay, Joff, you own a lot of apartment buildings and you've been doing this for a long time. You must have came from a family that had a lot of money, or you came from a family that had a lot of experience with investment real estate. And that's not the case at all. So, I grew up pretty humble beginnings. My parents were both non-traditional college students. So when they were going through college while I was in elementary school, and then we moved to the Madison area when I was in second grade, and they were just kind of starting their careers, and we were just really just kind of getting by at that time. And then, but I've always had a mind for investment and eventually investment real estate. That's a whole story by itself. But I graduated college in 2002 and was an elementary physical education teacher for 16 years. Again, with no experience or background in investment real estate. I bought my first personal residence in 2004, and I bought my first rental property in 2011. And between 2011 and now, I've gone from one single family home rental to now 54 units, mostly in Madison and a 4-unit in Verona. So 50 units in Madison and a 4-unit in Verona. So I always tell this story because, and that's the very short version of it, because I want people to realize that if you get started in investment real estate, things can really take off for you. So in just 12 years, that's how much things have changed for me. And then I'll get a little bit into why I call it 10 years to $10,000 an hour. So this is the actual journey that I took. So 2011, as I mentioned before, I bought one rental property, cash flow of $7,000 a year. Just rough estimate on the amount of time that I spent on it, probably 40 hours for the entire year, average of 3 a month. Although I would say probably half of that 40 happened the week of the rental turnover. So 1 week in mid-August accounted for 20 hours. And then the whole rest of the year accounted for 20 hours, just going out, showing the property to a new potential tenant, going to the property if they said something got broken or something like that. So with that in mind, 40 hours a year and $7,000 in that first year. And that's $175 an hour. That's how it kind of started. Well, eventually a developer wanted to buy that property. He worked for a company that built high-rise apartments, and he owned a lot of the properties on that block already. Me and my neighbor had the 2 best properties on the block. He eventually paid us top dollar to move along. I did a 1031 exchange into 2 rental properties, which were both 2 units. So now I went from a single family house to 2 units, which is 4 units total. And those were making a combined $20,000 a year. My time doubles, and now I'm making $250 an hour. And then you keep going. So I was saving up for other properties, and all of this is happening while I'm teaching. So I keep saving up for more properties. I bought that 4th rental property after I got licensed. So that was about the time that was the time that I got my license. I bought that property thinking I was going to use my license to buy rental properties for myself. And then I ended up making a career out of it, ended up getting out of teaching that year. So now I'm up to $40,000 a year, but my time keeps going up. And so you see that as the time goes up, that my dollar per hour is kind of plateauing. And then 2020 happened, and that first line there with the 80,000 a year, that's a hypothetical, because what happened right before that is I hired a property manager, because before that, I just, I was always focused on like, oh, if I hire a property manager, there's, 1/4 of my cash flow goes out the door. But then I started thinking about it a little bit differently. And I was like, okay, well, actually, if I hire a property manager and I get all this time freed up, I might actually buy some more properties. Because right now I'm so busy, I'm coming across good deals and I'm not buying them because I don't feel like I've got the time. So I went ahead and hired a property manager, came across this 8-unit deal. And then shortly thereafter, I actually purchased another 2 units and went up to 19 units. But that's what it hypothetically would have looked like. 250, I'm guessing here at this point, 250 hours a year, probably 21 hours a month. Well, now I've got a part-time job at that point if I would have kept doing that. The dollar per hour does go up, but again, incrementally. But now I hire a property manager, and now they've saved me so much time that now I can do everything that I used to do in 10 hours. Now you'll also notice that the total dollar amount just went from 80,000 down to 60,000. So 20,000 lost by hiring a manager. However, my dollar per hour goes from a hypothetical, $320 an hour up to $6,000 an hour. And I just kind of break down what that time looks like. So a 15-minute phone call every month, 2 walkthroughs of all the properties twice a year, and 2 hours for kind of random phone call, like, hey, we got, your furnace at such and such place just went out. We think we can replace this $500 part, or do you just want us to replace the furnace? Stuff like that happens. Then you got to handle, but I'm not the one handling it. I'm just, directing which direction to go. So then 2021 at this point, again, this is just kind of showing you where it would be, but I was kind of in the middle of that. So 40 financed units or 20 without financing. I was at, in 2021, I was at 27 units. 8 of them were paid off and the remaining were all financed. I was at $120K a year, 12 hours a year. That's my 10,000 an hour. So that's how I kind of came up with that. And that's in just 10-year span, going from, I bought a single family house to, now I've got 27 units and making 6 figures in then about an hour a month. And then this is the property chain of how things went. So that single family house is a 911 Dell plane, which that home still exists, but that address does not exist anymore. They moved the home around the block. It's asterisk because I don't own that property anymore. Everything else on that list, it was kind of the progression. So I, then bought those two 2 units. Then I bought another 2 unit, I bought a 3 unit. Then I bought that 8 unit, bought another 2 unit. I bought an 8 unit, which I have since sold. And then I bought that 4 unit in Verona, bought a 5 unit. Earlier this year, I bought a 24 unit. I sold the 8 unit on Valley Street in order to purchase it. That was a 1031 exchange. And then East Lawn, I'll talk a little bit about later today. But yeah, in a 1031 exchange, for those that you don't know, that's just where essentially, typically if you were to sell an investment for more than what you purchased it for, you'd have to pay capital gains. Well, a 1031 exchange you get to use in investment real estate where you don't have to pay it as long as you go into another investment real estate that property that's equal or greater in value. You essentially get to defer that payment to a later date. All right, so here's the disclaimers, all the not so fun stuff. So I'm a licensed agent who's bought and sold investment property both before and after I've been licensed. So I'm sharing those experiences with you. Not a legal professional, so if you need legal advice, please consult an attorney. I'm also not an accountant, so if you need accounting advice, please consult a CPA. I do talk about these things, but I'm just telling you, this is what I've been advised. You got to talk to your own CPA to see what they had advised. And then I'm not a financial advisor, so when you're looking to put together a financial portfolio, please consult a financial planner. Okay, the other disclaimer. Real estate is a get-rich-slow game. That's why it's 10 years to 10,000. an hour, not 10 weeks or 10 months. It does take a little bit of time. The benefits are not immediate. They do take time to develop, but they are substantial. It's really a snowball effect. The way I talk about it is, just imagine, you're out building a snowman, you're kind of packing the ball and you're getting on the ground, you're kind of rolling it. Well, as soon as you get it big enough that you can get it to the edge of the hill and just kind of roll it off, now it's working on its own. Well, then you got to start your next one and then get that one going. Well, once you have multiple snowballs kind of rolling down, all working for you, you don't have to do hardly anything other than keep an eye on them. And that's kind of that's when you really are in a good spot. So why do I do this? So investment real estate's changed my life, and letting people know about what I've learned is how I can give back. One of the things I've been able to do through my investment real estate is start doing scholarships at the school that I graduated from and still coach at. I used to teach at. In just the last 4 years, we've given $46,000 worth of scholarships, and the goal is to keep growing that until we're doing a full ride every year. And I know that by helping people in this room who have good things that they want to do for their families and their communities, that this is helping to make you, your family, and the community better. Okay, so today, again, is Finance the Deal. So I have guest speakers that will be talking today. Craig Schauer from Wintrust is going to be talking about financing conventionally. And then Casey Koenig of Bank of Prairie du Sac is going to be talking about commercial financing. And then I'll spend a little bit of time at the end talking about seller financing. I did one seller finance deal last year, and I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. All right, so I'll let Craig come on up. So let's hear it for Craig.
Well, as Joff said, I'm Craig Schauer. I'm with Wintrust Mortgage. I'm a residential mortgage lender. You'll typically find me with the 1 to 4 unit properties is typically where you'd come to me to finance. We do have options for 5 to 8 units as well. That's under our non-qualifying mortgage. Typically, if you came to me to finance an 8 unit, I'd probably be recommending you speak to Casey on the commercial side. So he'll talk a little bit about what options are available on that. But what I'm going to really dive into is the 1 to 4 unit properties that, you as first time, investors, potentially third, fourth time investors, are looking to buy that duplex, 4 unit, whatever it may be. I'd be able to have that deep dive conversation with you to kind of go over what your options might look like in the residential space. One thing that I know Casey's going to talk to you guys about as well, where the restriction is with me, ownership has to be held in your individual name. So if you come to me and you say, hey, I want to finance it in my LLC, what I'm going to tell you is I won't be able to close your loan if you want to do it in your LLC, but you can close it in your individual name. I would also refer you to your mortgage to say, hey, if you're going to do it after, because you've probably heard that as well, that you could put it into an LLC after. I don't have any disclaimers up here, but I'll probably say the same thing. If you're going to do that, consult with the title company, see if that's an option, and review your mortgage to see if you're still within the bounds of what your mortgage lays out for you. Everything in my world from a qualification standpoint is based on credit, income, and assets. I actually walk my clients through that quite a bit. Talk about these in buckets. But one of the unique things for investment financing is that income from the other units may help with qualifying. Now, depending on who the investor is, there might be different guidelines on how much income can be used. But let's say that you have no history in the investment world. Typically, you can use about 75% of the leases or market rates for a property to help offset. So a lot of questions I get, like, Craig, how do people buy multiple properties, right? Well, it's through that, is using income to offset the liabilities that you acquire through time. So we'd take a look at that and see, what options are available. And then the last point, available loan options depend on your occupancy expectations and your down payment. So I'm going to get into those a little bit, because in my world, those two things kind of can alter which path you have to take. So owner occupancy. So if you ever heard the term house hacking. Have you guys all heard that term before? Basically what it is a real estate strategy that involves purchasing a property, living in part of it, and renting it out. You may know why that's beneficial for you, or you may not. Well, one of the biggest reasons is you'll see here there's different loan programs that are available if you're going to own or occupy it, right? Whereas if you don't, there's going to be a lot less, which I'll get into as well. You're going to typically have less down payment options available to you. And so I'm going to go through a couple of those. So conventional, that's your Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac investor that you probably have heard of. I did bold the options available for as low as 5% down if you own or occupy a 1 to 4 unit. The reason why I bolded this is because this is actually very new. So they actually rolled this out in fall last year. So typically you were still looking at about 15% down if you're going to own or occupy as well. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have pretty similar guidelines, but a little bit different when it comes to loan to value and things like that. So this kind of just opened up a whole different realm of financing options for buyers, quite honestly. And so there are ARM options and fixed rate options that are available in this space as well. And I do want to talk about some of the other ones that I would say that the FHA loan was a very big one in this house hacking term prior to this change for conventional financing. So FHA you can get into as low as 3.5% down. Some of the challenges with FHA, though, is that it does require an upfront and a monthly mortgage insurance premium that, when you start crunching the numbers, that can really eat into your cash flow on properties as well. So you're not going to have that upfront mortgage insurance. You would on conventional if you did put 5% down, but at least it gives you the option to own or occupy a 1 to 4 unit for conventional. But going back to FHA, it's great for credit challenged. If maybe your credit score is not where you want it to be right now, but you do want to buy that duplex, right? FHA ultimately, when you crunch the numbers, might be your best path. So that's something that I would help you out with. We would work through the numbers to make sure what path makes sense for you. You'd also work with someone like Joff, as a realtor, who would kind of walk through what your challenges might be getting one offer versus the other accepted, whether it's conventional or FHA or any of these loan programs. I did put on here one of the challenges for FHA, and we've ran into it before on the 3 to 4 units. There's a self-sufficiency test that you have to pass. So essentially, the non-owner occupied units have to basically withstand the mortgage payment itself. So where that becomes a challenge is in rising rate environments, right? As we've all, just went through the last couple of years. Now you start looking at the other units and, if they don't cover your PITI, which is your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, well, then you're not going to qualify for an FHA mortgage. So you're going to have to switch gears. Other options for owner occupied investment options would be VA. If you're a veteran of the military, you can't really beat that. You got 0% down options, no mortgage insurance, and quite honestly, you can hold that home as well with a VA loan. The one thing I would caution you is understand that if you get into a VA loan, that your entitlement could be used up and you might not be able to go buy another primary residence with VA financing. That doesn't mean you can't use another loan product, but just be aware of that. Another loan program that a lot of people don't know that you can consider when it's in the investment space, and I'm just going to use an example of one of my clients. WIDA does offer a very low down payment. There is a way to get into a multi-unit with WIDA with 2% down, okay? One of the things you have to be very careful about, though, is knowing what your exit strategy is with WIDA, because WIDA is only for owner-occupied properties. So if you are going to all of a sudden vacate that and go owner-occupy another property, WIDA might call your note due. And so you want to be very careful. And the example that I'll share with you is I had a client who he had a little bit of a rehab project. He didn't have a lot of cash on hand. He was going to do it over a period of time. So we got him into it was a 2-unit. It was a duplex. And he was going to do the repairs over time. And then he was going to rent it out, live there for a long time. And then his goal, and we did talk about this, but his goal was that he was going to ultimately sell the property once he rehabbed the whole thing. So WIDA was a great option for him for an owner occupied situation. Non-owner occupied investment properties with conventional financing. This is where you're going to find more restrictions on the amount that you have to put down on the home. So the one thing that I'll tell you in my space is we'll kind of talk about your situation a little bit, because if you owned $1 million house down the road, you can't come to me and say, hey, Craig, I'm going to go owner occupy this, 2-unit duplex that's $250,000. Underwriting wouldn't really buy that scenario. And you'd have some issues going through the process with that. So that's when you'd be looking at a non-owner occupied situation. And I know that Casey's going to be able to talk about, these pure investment options as well from the commercial space. But yeah, if you were looking for a conventional loan, a 1-unit would require 15% down. That's consistent on both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. 2 to 4 units, you're looking at closer to 25% down. So while that might help on the cash flow aspect of it, that's a lot of money up front, especially if you're looking to get into investing right away. And that's where the house hacking option, if you don't own other properties, is definitely the best way for you to go. I did write on here too that additional rate adjusters apply for investment properties. So it's not only more money down, but it's also going to be higher rates that you're looking at as well. And I actually have a slide that I'll walk through where that comes from and why that actually happens. Another option that I would definitely recommend that you look into is bank portfolio options. So in the non-owner occupied space, there are different banks that will allow this type of financing. And instead of following investor guidelines, they'll make up their own guidelines, right? They're going to keep it on the books. And so we do have those options at Wintrust as well. They're not always better than maybe some of the other options, but if you have a unique situation, there's also more flexibility. So if you don't follow a specific investor, there might be options for some flexibility in the underwriting of that property. Another thing that I put on here for various reasons is, have you considered a second home or a vacation home? I will give actually a disclaimer on this. Is part of the reason is because of some of the things that we do at Wintrust, how you might be able to get into a second home and actually have much better options from a rate standpoint than if you did it as an investment property. I will tell you that the investors did kind of align investment properties and second homes with their rate adjusters. Literally, I think it was in 2022. So in theory, they're technically as expensive. But what I will tell you is 10% down on a second home. That might get you in. And I'll give you an example on this space too. I had a client that came up to me. He's like, Craig, I want to buy a place up north, right? And I want to, be there a couple weekends out of the year, but I want to Airbnb this place. Well, after talking through his scenario, he technically fit the definition of a second home as well. And we were able to get much better pricing for him on that purchase than going the route of a traditional investment loan option. And, that's what he came to me and said. He said, hey, Craig, I want to buy an investment property. And after talking to him, we figured out some other options for him. So the 10% down is key. Investors have updated the rate adjusters to be in line with those investment properties. I just mentioned that. I'll show you the charts on that. But they have loosened criteria for a second home. It used to be more strict on what a vacation home could be, and they kind of changed those after COVID. So with 20% down on a second home, this is my shameless plug for Wintrust. We do cover a lot of the rate adjusters that I'll show you guys here on the next slide. And this making it very similar to an owner-occupied property. And then the other thing to really note is if you're trying to get this property and you don't qualify without using the unit income, you're not going to get that rental income on a second home. You're going to have to qualify purely just on your income alone. So this is the chart I've kind of been talking about. I get a lot of clients that kind of ask me like, why are rates so much higher on investment properties than, just owner occupied single family? These are charts. These are charts that the investors actually lay out. So, if you come to me, everything's based on credit, down payment, and loan features, if you will. So if you see here, there's adjusters to the rate for 2 to 4 units. There's adjusters for second home, adjusters for investment properties. So if you come to me and you say, hey, Craig, I want to put, 15% down on a single unit investment property, you're going to have a 4.125% pricing adjuster. So don't think of that as, hey, base rates are 6.5. I have to add 4 1/8 to that rate. So a pricing adjuster is a little bit different than that. A pricing adjuster basically is about every 3/8 to half of a point on an adjuster could equate to about an 1/8 of your interest rate. So if you are, let's say you want to do a 1 unit investment property and put 15% down, but you have 660 credit, right? There would be a 1.75 rate adjuster, 2.125% rate adjuster. Then if it was a 4 unit, you'd have to add on, another adjuster here. And then you'd add on 4.125% to that rate as well. So, if somebody's buying a primary residence at 6.5%, and I'm like, hey, rates are going to be, 9%. That's the reason why. It's not set by the bank. It's an investor-driven adjuster. And so, really what my job is to kind of walk through your goals, what you're trying to accomplish with your purchase, and see, is there a way that we can minimize this stuff, quite honestly. And so, there's no doubt that if you don't own 6 investment properties already, the house hacking method with owner occupancy is definitely the way to go. But yeah, that's really where I come in and can help you finance, whether you're buying, an owner occupied or in that investment space. So, does anyone have any questions? And we could take questions at the end too. Yeah.
Do you see people buying duplexes or something of the sort with PETA and then refinancing to move?
Do I see that? Not a lot, but I will tell you that's a great strategy, right? The one thing that you got to be careful with is knowing that make sure you do it obviously before you vacate the property, right? Not only for your rate standpoint, but you also don't want me to call your no due, right? So yes, you absolutely can. The other thing that you need to be aware of too is like what rate environment am I in? If I bought one now and had that strategy, not a bad idea, right? Because we think rates are going to go down. If I would have did that in 2020, that would have been a terrible idea, right? Because you're not going to see those rates again. So yes, that's absolutely a strategy. Refinancing on any of these, is a potential opportunity. Whether it's to get rid of mortgage insurance or get into one of these other programs. So yeah, go ahead.
Are the loans that you're talking about generally 30-year loans?
Yeah, typically, there is 15-year options as well. There is another chart for that, some of the credit adjusters that I showed don't apply to 15-year mortgages, but you're still going to find those with those unique features, I call them, whether it's, multi-unit, whether it's an investment property, those things will still apply. But by doing 15-year terms, you could get rid of some of the adjusters that I had up there. And you'll see that by owner occupying too, you completely avoid that whole investment adjuster, so going back to that house hacking term, that's why, you just want to work with a lender that's going to actually walk through kind of like what your goals are with the property, because you don't want to find yourself in a bad spot. Or, if you just call a lender and say, hey, I want an investment property, they're like, sure, here's my rate, right? There might be other ways to structure it. And actually, Casey's going to get into other ways that I can't do in the commercial space. So any other questions? Go ahead.
I was going to ask, how long do you have to own occupancy?
So it's kind of funny because this actually just came up. The general rule is 12 months, but I actually had to walk a client through this. Here's what I'll tell you. There's really no mortgage police, but if you go back to your mortgage in your note, and you dig through the actual documents, I actually had a client that asked me to do that. And I actually found the specific place. So Fannie and Freddie do require you to plan to occupy it for the, at least 12 months. Now, they do have kind of a caveat on there that, unforeseen circumstances, whatever it may be. And the truth is that I've had many clients that have bought other homes within 12 months, right? I've had a client that bought, all of a sudden they got relocated, right? You absolutely can, there's ways to maneuver around that, but in general, they want 12 months before you hop onto the next one.
All right.
Correct.
Oops. And then I did have another question, but while find the slide for it, maybe I'll remember it, maybe I won't. I just want to mention that when it comes to house hacking, there are different levels of house hacking. So house hacking could be as simple as buying, single family home residence and renting out the other rooms. The next step would be buying a multifamily, a 2, 3, or 4 unit, and renting out the other units, and then you live in your unit by yourself. And then the next one would be you renting out all the other units and additionally renting out other rooms within your unit. That's kind of the different levels of house hacking. Anyways, we'll bring Casey up here from Bank of Prairie du Sac to talk about the commercial lending side of things. And so let's give it up for Casey.
Thanks, Craig and Joff here to lead this off, and excited to jump into the next chapter here on the commercial lending side of things. I was a residential lender at one point, so I know a little bit of what Craig's doing, but there's lots of changes that happen in that world, right? So I think I did the same thing as you, kind of moved off to the side. So we got to stand right here. So I'm a commercial lender. I'm with the Bank of Prairie du Sac. Joff and I have worked together on a majority of those units, about 2018. So if you go back to that slide, I think, once you hit Gammon, yep, and then we touched it. So we've had a great relationship, and I think Craig kind of talked about it too. I mean, really on all of our ends, it's a partnership, right? We want to fit you into the best product, best structure that we can. So we're a partner with you throughout this project or throughout any purchase. So commercial lending side of things, is a little bit different. Really, I can lend to any type of investment or business purpose acquisition of any type of real estate, essentially. It cannot be an owner-occupied dwelling. So any of the owner-occupied stuff, you would talk to Craig. But anything else that would be business purpose, I can help you out on. So I can help you out from a single family investment property all the way up to a 150 unit development if you wanted to on a multifamily side. Again, I listed some other property types here too: retail, industrial, hospitality, commercial owner occupied SBA, and then short-term rentals. That's been a hot one in the last few years that I've been able to finance as well. Also on my side of things, you can purchase the property in a business entity name. We normally see LLCs just from the liability perspective, but it could really be in any type of business entity, a corporation or partnership as well. Or you can purchase it in your personal name as well. I could finance that. The difference really between when you hear me talk and Craig talk is all of our stuff that we do is kept on our portfolio at the bank. So in saying that, we have a little bit more creativity and flexibility in how we look at the underwriting of the cash flow versus having to go to an investor on a long-term fixed rate and kind of having those guidelines there. However, the downside a little bit is that since we keep those loans on our portfolio is that we really only lock rates typically for about 3 to 5 years. So where we would have a payback schedule of about 25 years, you'll see that 25-year amortization here, versus a 30-year, really every 3 to 5 years, we're going to be talking to see what the updated rate environment is and then renewing the loan at the rate environment at that time. And the reason we do this is, what Craig touched on. 2 years ago, rates were 3-4% lower than they are now. So if we were to keep our rates that low for 30 years, that would lose us a lot of money in the banking industry. So, because we're We're all about those margins and rates. So that's why we have a 3 to 5 year rate lock. So up front, it's more flexible in how we get things done, but the risk then would be that rate adjustment, right? So I always like to say, if you're really want to build a portfolio quickly, you want to take on some risk, it might make a lot more sense to work with me. But if you want to lower your risk a little bit, have a 30-year fixed rate, you know that's going to cash flow, the residential side would work a little bit better. So our typical structure of an investment property loan, and this is all really subject to the specific deal itself, as well as your, global cash flow, your global financial position. But typically, we're at a 20% down payment, a 3 to 5 year rate lock, payments are based on a 25-year amortization. On my side, cash flow is key to how I'm looking at the underwriting of the property. So I'll jump into that a little bit more here. Specifically underwriting a property. So one thing that bankers like to throw out there a lot is an acronym called DSCR. It's the debt service coverage ratio. And what we're looking at with the debt service coverage ratio, yes, I did hear that earlier on. Debt service coverage ratio. Yep, exactly. It's really the number one thing that bankers will look at is that cash flow. And what we're looking at is we're not looking at your lease prices per se. We're looking at your net income. So after expense, after income, expense, bottom line income, we're looking for that income to cover your debt service at least 1.2 times. So that means that net income covers your annual debt service payment, plus leaves a little bit of a buffer in case there's additional costs, additional capital expenditures needed that year, expenses come in higher, you have more vacancy. It gives a buffer there, so you're not having to put more money into the property to cover that cash flow. So again, what we're looking at here is 3 main areas in a profit and loss statement or a projection. Rent, again, creativity. What we look at when we're assessing a property is, are they at market? Are they below market? Or is this a value add scenario where you can increase rents by putting money into the property, sprucing it up a bit, putting in some amenities, things of that nature. We're also looking at reimbursables. This is, I think we've seen a lot of this in the last couple years. We're seeing a lot more additional items included in leases. Includes utilities, parking. Those are the 2 big ones. Maybe garbage, laundry, some of those type of expenses. Joff's been able to implement some of that in what he's working in his properties. And then expenses. We look at current expenses, as well as then, what do we think expenses will be long term? So the best practice here with everything is to, collect historical expense rent on the property, as well as then we're going to put together a pro forma of what we think we can get to, right? And what it looks like when the property is fully stabilized. I noticed, or I put a couple things in here on the expense side. So one thing that we're seeing here recently is that real estate taxes, especially when you buy a property, we're seeing those increase quite a bit because of assessed values. So the state is really coming in, looking at when you buy a property, the increase of that value of that purchase price is also increasing your assessed value. So you got to always be careful with how you do that and how you underwrite a property when looking at it from a real estate tax perspective. Same with insurance, especially in the housing or dwelling world, multifamily units, insurance has went up quite a bit. And there's been a little bit more struggle, at least in the Dane County market, with a lot of the clients that I'm working with there. So wanted to throw that there. And at the very bottom, put this in bold, value add versus stabilized. So how we look at things is really dependent on the property, right? So if it's a stabilized property and it doesn't cash flow based on my debt, probably not a whole lot I can do with this unless you're going to put more down for a down payment, right? Which then hurts your returns for your side. But if it's a value add scenario, we can maybe work on it a little bit. If it's not cash flowing, to get it to where it's going to cash flow, and I can finance the property that way if we're comfortable with it. So I'm going to use an example of Joff's that I feel like was really clean example. I mean, all of your examples are clean, but no, this is just a property that we financed recently that I felt like just went really smoothly. And this is a 4-unit. And Joff might get into this a little bit more later, but on the right-hand side here, it's a 4-unit in Verona. So if you look at the current rents, $775 to $875 for rents. underwriting a little bit higher vacancy there because we know that there's going to probably be turnover here because this is a value add property. This is a property that is under rented, especially specifically if you put some work into each unit, like Joff did. You could really substantially increase rent. So you look at then also some of your expenses that we have based off of maybe some rents on the management side, a percentage, what the taxes are, a percentage for repairs, as you can kind of look at it. Same with some maybe maintenance as well as plow and insurance. So if you look on the very bottom, and I hope you guys can all see this here good, but on the very bottom on the right-hand side, we have a loan amount, we have the rate, we have the amortization. And this one's on a 30-year. Well, you look at that times coverage there, that debt service coverage ratio is under a 1.1, which means that up front, Joff needed to put some money into this deal, right? He needed to cover cash flow until he could get those rents up and stabilize expenses. Well, about a year later, he was able to do that. So if you look on the right-hand side, I believe that rents on all those units are $1,275. He put some dollars into each unit. We're still conservatively looking at about a 3% vacancy. The market's probably about 3 to 4% right now. And then have current expenses that he has from his P&L. And you look at the very bottoms at that same loan amount and interest rate. Now we're at a 151 debt service coverage ratio. So for me, on the banking side of things, that's what I'm looking at. I know that a lot of times from the investor side of things, you're looking at an IRR or cash on cash return. But if you want to kind of talk my language, it's really from the risk perspective of a banker. We're looking at that debt service coverage, and this is great. If you brought me a 151 all day, I would say, yes, let's do this deal. Okay. So that's just an example.
Yeah, so even though as is didn't look very good on your end, when you look at the stabilized part, you're like, hey, this looks like a good thing for the bank. We want to do this.
Correct. So it's really subjective to the deal, right? And also kind of it goes back into the partnership and also your global cash flow, right? So Joff and I have been working a long time together. This is what he does. I know he's going to be able to do it, right? So we have that partnership to say, okay, yeah, we can look at a property that isn't cash flowing, but we know it's going to cash flow, right? There's that trust there. If we're just starting together, then I rely a lot of times on what your personal financial statement looks like. What does outside of this property, what does your world look like? What does your W-2 income look like? What do your liabilities look like? If you have a lot of income, little liabilities, I know that you can cover that cash flow for a period of time till we get to a stabilized property where it's earning you money. So every deal is a little different how we look at it. I'll also say this. If I knew right away talking to someone that really in doing my due diligence and research that the cap on the market is really on the left-hand side, so the rents had no room to move, that's really top of market and there wasn't much we could do there, then I'd say, okay, this is a 20% down deal. You might need to bring 40 or 50% down to make this cash flow because there is no opportunity really. It's not going to cash flow, right? Unless we can somehow get 3% increases every year for the next 10 years, you're going to be, losing money on this. So it's really specific. So even the down payment is going to be really specific to the type of property, where it's located, and then your global world as well. So I'm going to jump now into kind of the process of commercial lending. Generally speaking, every deal is different. Every purchase is different, but I want to kind of take you through just kind of a standard structure of what it would look like. So I like to do a lot of legwork up front to get things to where they need to be so there's no hiccups throughout the process. So when I work together with someone, it's really initially having you identify a property. We have a conversation about the property. I'm going to want the historical income and expense on that property to see where rents are and see what the expenses are. And then I'm also going to want a projected income and expense, right? What do we think? And we kind of talk through that. Are you going to put any work in the property? Are there any capital expenditures to improve the property right away that you need? Any deferred maintenance? Here's where I think the income and expense. And if we work together on that perspective, you can get that to me, and in 24 hours, I can tell you, hey, yeah, this looks like a good deal. Okay. At that point too, I'm typically going to want, if we haven't worked together, I'm going to want some personal financials as well. So on our side, really the main things that I need is a personal financial statement. So if anybody wants to get into investment real estate, I would say fill one out right now, right? Get ahead of the game, find one online, because I can use really anybody's personal financial statement. I have my own template, so if you want that, I could always send that to you. But it's a 2-page net worth statement listing your assets, your liabilities, and then typically on the second page, it asks more in depth of, where are your checking accounts? How much is in each of your IRAs, or what properties do you own? That's the main thing that I want there. I'm also going to ask for the last 3 years of your tax returns just to see what your income, was historically. There might be additional items like if you already own property, rent rolls, or a property cash flow, or if you own a business, maybe business tax returns, K1s, something of that nature. But this is pretty much a standard thing. But if you give me all this, you give me 24 to 48 hours, I can say, okay, here are the terms that I'm thinking. Terms that we're going to talk through. Again, specific to the deal. Who's the borrower? Are you going to open an entity, LLC? You're going to buy it in your personal name. Who are the owners going to be, right? Is it you? Is it you and your brother, sister, wife, parents? Trying to figure that out there. Then also, here's what I'm thinking for loan to value or down payment, right? So if for example, stabilized deal, if it doesn't cash flow, it's going to be a larger down payment. If I think we can get there, it's going to be maybe around that 20, 25%. Term rate, amortization, our fees. A big one on the commercial side is a personal guarantee. So since I do business with Joff, right? I don't do business with his LLCs. So what happens when I lend money to the LLCs is I also have to have a personal guarantee, right? Which is stating that, hey, even though you're lending money, I'm going to be on the hook. I know this is going to perform, so I'm going to personally guarantee this loan in case anything were to happen. And then I'll put in their conditions still need to be met. Most of the time, sometimes I have to go for a board approval or a loan committee approval. But what I do when I get everything up front is I already have those discussions with my team, right? I say, this is what I'm thinking. And 99.9% of the time, that's what happens, right? As long as our conditions are met. And you're going to see those underneath here. So really then at that point, hey, we move forward together, offer to purchase, get an appraisal ordered. Inspection sometimes will be needed. I don't require that too much unless we know there's maybe a major structural issue with the property, or the appraiser mentions there's a major structural issue with the property. Then I'll require it, but not normally required by me. Environmental. This is a new thing in my world that's become more talked about. So on commercial property, we do an environmental analysis now, which pretty much the start of it is we take a desktop report that does research, pulls from the internet, the DNR, that says, is there any potential issues with this property from an environmental perspective? Is there underground fuel tanks? So if you get rural, this happens more in rural areas, that this might be an issue. Is there any potential fuel leakage from that? Is there potential contamination with any type of, I don't know, like a Clinky cleaner? Sometimes they have the cleaning solution, right? There might be that issue. So you don't see it as much in housing as you do in other types of commercial property. But this is a big deal, right? Because if that were to generate any red flags, we'd have to get into longer due diligence on it. And ultimately, we're doing that not only to protect us, but to protect you. Because sometimes some of these cleanups, when you get into the soil, you hear some horror stories that on a 2-unit house downtown, sometimes it's $100,000 to clean up. So then what are you doing? You're losing all of that investment, if not more, if you're trying to sell that property, if people know that there's going to be an issue with it. So we get that all out of the way ahead of time. And I really haven't had much issues with that at all. Title commitment, I'm sure a lot of you know how this works too, but work with a title company just to make sure there's no issues with title, transfer of deed, transfer of ownership, any easements, any of those items. So a lot of this is like a residential transaction at this point. After we get all that back, we put together a commitment letter. Goal is always to have the same terms we talk about up front. Here it is, with all of the due diligence taken out of the way, we're ready to close. Okay. Closing, settlement statement, a little different than the residential side. I feel like those come together at the last minute when you're talking rents, you're talking security deposits, you're talking prorations. We have that, and then we'll just need insurance on the property and then business entity documentation. And that's sometimes one we miss, especially if you need an operating agreement when you have multiple owners of an LLC. That kind of comes down to the last minute sometimes. So again, pretty standard scenario. I put at the bottom here that, in commercial lending world, things can change. I mean, in the residential lending world too, things change as comes up. So that's generally speaking how it looks. So questions?
You said things change, but what are you talking about?
What if an appraisal comes in? Appraisal comes in low. We have to talk about maybe a new loan amount.
Lower than
Yep. The appraisal is lower than the purchase price.
later?
Yeah, like after we close. Yeah, no, this is all within the closing timeline period. Yep. So after it closes, it's closed. Yep. Typically, right. Typically then after it closes, we'll ask for updated financial statements annually just to stay ahead of it. And then once we get closer to the time of renewal on those 3 to 5 years, then we have discussions on updated financials and where's the property at and all the above.
That 3 to 5 renewal never decreases in rate, it always increases.
It could decrease. So if I did a loan right now and we came back and the market is calling for, a 4.5% rate 3 years from now, which I'm hoping for. We have to be competitive, right? Because at that time you could technically go to a new lender, right? Because the loan's up for renewal. So it would decrease at that point. So it all just depends on the rate environment at the time. Could increase too. So.
You said that sometimes an inspection could be required. What would be a circumstance that, because I'm still seeing like 4 out of 5 offers don't have.
Yeah. So from our side of things, since we keep our, everything on the portfolio, we don't sell loans, is we just want to make sure that property is in really solid enough condition that it's not going to fall over or have major issues if trying to resell, right? So if I'm looking at the property or if I tour the property and I see major issues, and I see this maybe more on the commercial side of things, so like a retail, industrial, or a office building, I might then say, hey, that property, it's older. I'm seeing some major wear and tear on it. I might require an inspection, and we get that out of the way up front. But most of the time, that's not an issue. I have had it where appraisers come back and they say, hey, there's some structural issues. And then we do, at that point, I will need one. So
that's what their flexibility as well. Like on the residential side, the investors don't require inspection. They go off the appraisal. Obviously, in your world, you're going to kind of gauge what kind of offer you have to write to be competitive and how you protect your buyer, right? So that comes with your flexibility too. You also might require things that it's more black and white in the residential space where
we work in the gray.
Yeah.
Yep. And again, I think it comes down to as well, like as we grow, if we're new, we're working together, I'm going to grill you a little bit more, right? I'm going to ask those type of questions. But as we grow that relationship and I know what you're doing, right? And vice versa, me too, right? We learn from each other, right? But once we get to that point, then it's that type of stuff kind of, I don't think I've ever even probably brought that up to you
No,
on something, because I know he's going to handle it.
Yeah, now it's to the point where I just throw him a property address and a purchase price. And here's the current rents and here's where I believe we can get them to. And at most you're like, oh, can you update your financial statement for me?
Yep.
And that's about it.
Because it's been a year.
Like a pre-approval.
Yep.
I mean, I can go from having not talked to him in, over a month to having a letter in like an hour or two. It's pretty quick.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? All right, we'll get on to the next part. So if we were talking about areas of gray, now we'll talk about seller financing where pretty much anything is possible. So I've only done one of these deals. I hope to do some more of them, enough that I can start actually having a whole session on this one. But it's very simple. It's just not easy to find. And this is why. For it to work, you need a seller with an investment that they own with no debt or so little debt that the down payment is going to cover that amount. You also need a win-win outcome where both the buyer and the seller benefit. And sometimes that's not possible. And then in which you would then just go with a traditional sale, whether you use commercial or conventional. Buyer has to be a great communicator because these deals don't happen very often. And so they have to really explain why this makes sense to the seller. And I mean, I think you really have to be honest too, because otherwise, you know, if they don't trust you, they're definitely not going to want to do that kind of a deal with you. Seller does have to be open-minded, and you can get as creative as you need to be to make it work for both sides. Anything goes as long as both sides agree. And that's kind of what my take on the seller financing, having done one of these now. So what is needed for that? An standard offer to purchase, and then as well as any other forms that are needed, an addendum S and addendum R, condition report. Although sometimes, you know, you're working with a seller that isn't working with an agent, so you might have to like educate them that like, hey, you know, technically, you know, for your situation, I'm pretty sure that you do need to fill out a condition report, but you know, there is a land contract addendum. So for agents in the room, and I know there's a number of you, that's in zip forms. It's a pretty easy form to fill out. And then of course, I would strongly encourage you have the land contract written by a title company or an attorney. The sellers I worked with were like, hey, let's just meet at the coffee shop and put this thing together. No need to, you know, they were trying to keep their expenses down. And I was like, you know what, I'll just pay for the title company. Don't worry about it. I just wanted to know that everything was buttoned up. I was not willing to do that. But yeah, and I think this is, so I'll talk a little bit about how this deal worked and how it was, you know, going back to this, how it was a win-win. So basically, I sent out a bunch of mailers earlier this year. And interestingly enough, the first call I got turned into a 24 unit deal, which I actually did a full talk on. And you can watch that whole session on YouTube now. And then the very last call I got was this 2 unit off seller finance deal. And basically they had already thrown away the card or the letter or whatever it was. And then they were talking more about it and like, man, we're sick of managing this place. We're on it. Hey, I think this person, like they were actually an agent. They weren't just like, you know, a random investor. I bet they would know how to do this. And so one of the sellers used to be an agent decades ago, but used to be an agent. And so they called me up and right out of the gates, hey, we've got this 2 unit. And like, you got to remember, like I put a lot of money into that 24 unit deal. So like, it's not like I've got ample funds. And most of the people who call me up were like, yeah, if you pay me enough money, I'll sell. And it's like, oh, that's not really, you know, like, I'm not going to overpay for a property. I sent out these just to see, you know, who's, you know, looking to get a property off their hands. So these guys, like, they're like, hey, we got this 2 units, a 2 bed, 1 bath on the main level. It's an efficiency upstairs. It's a nice brick building. It's a double lot. You know, the rents are a little bit low, but the building's in good shape. And I was like, okay, well, you know, what do you want? And they're like, you know, it's near East Side. And I had a property actually just a couple blocks away from it. And they said, you know, our dream price would be $300,000. And I'm thinking right out of the gates, well, okay, you know, a 2 unit or 2 bedroom on the main level, efficiency upstairs. Yeah, it's probably, I mean, that's the MLS price, like, you know, so I'm like, at this point, I'm just trying to get them off the phone. I'm like, okay, well, you know, I'll crunch the numbers and I'll get back to you. And I think I was actually leaving, on a vacation like in 2 days. So I was just like, yeah, I want to pack and finish up what I got to do. And then he said right at the end, oh, did you mention the seller financing part? Oh yeah, we'd really like to do seller financing. And I'm like, oh, okay, now I'm a lot more interested. And so I said, okay, what has you interested in seller financing? And they said, well, we'd like to keep that passive income stream going. Like right now, we like getting a check every month. What we don't like is having to go out to the property and answer calls, and we just don't like the hassle. I'm like, okay, well, do you own the property outright? Yes, we have no debt on the property. Okay, great, because that gives you, quite a few options. And then I said, well, do you have any expectation as far as, what kind of monthly payment or anything else? They said, no, just, we just want to make sure we have some money coming in. So I'm like, okay, well, great. So then I did end up going out to see the property before I left on my vacation. Because now I'm like, okay, one of the things I've learned in doing this is time kills deals. So, as soon as you know that there's a potential deal, like I just pursue it really hard until the person says no, or until I find out there's something about the price they want or something about the property that's not going to work. And then obviously it's a done deal. So I was like, okay, let me see the property. So I saw the property, and overall I liked it. You could tell that the tenants from the main level were really hoping that this wouldn't sell, because they were pointing out everything that was wrong about the property. Like, oh, look at this, look at that. And for me, I'm like, oh, look, I'm thinking in my back of my head, like, you're not changing the dial on this at all. Like, I've seen way worse than this. But it did have, a number of deferred maintenance issues, which is pretty common with people that are self-managing for that length of time. And then, yeah, we walked out of there, and I just said, okay, well, I'm definitely interested. And they said, great. And they said, well, what would you be willing to offer? And I said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you your dream price of $300,000 if you give me my dream financial terms. And they said, well, what would that look like? I said, well, for one, your rents are crazy low. So even if I had the lowest interest rate of all time, I would be negatively cash flowing. So I want no payments for the first 11 months. They said, no problem. Then I said, I'd like to only put a pretty small down payment. I'm thinking like $40,000, which is about a 12% down payment. They said, no problem. That's enough. That's enough for us. I said, and I'd like to have the same interest rate I was getting 2 years ago. They said, what was that? I said, 3.5. And they were like, oh, can you do 4? And I'm like, sure. And then we shook on it. And they said, we're expecting an offer after you get back from your trip. And literally, like the day after I got back from my trip, they were like, where's your offer? And I'm like, hey, I've never written one of these before. I'm still like trying to figure this out. But I did have one probably within 3-4 days of getting back. I had an offer to them, which they immediately accepted. And we closed on it like 3 weeks later. And I remember we closed here at Homestead, and I remember they must have not realized that I could hear them. They walked out and they were like, see how easy that was? Because I don't know how many of you have been involved in a cash purchase versus a finance purchase. But when you're at the closing table of a finance purchase, it's like you're in there, like the buyer is signing for, a lengthy period of time. The closing usually goes 45, 60 minutes. Well, if you do commercial financing, it goes quite a bit faster, but there's still, but when you do a cash purchase, I mean, it's just like buyer signs 2-3 things, seller signs 2-3 things. You're done in like less than 5 minutes. I mean, it's really quick. That's about what it was like. It was really, really quick. And they walked out of there and they were super happy. So here was the win-win. So for me, I've got a property that under any financing terms that I would have had would have negatively cash flowed for the first year. There was no way of getting around it with how low the rents were. Instead, I now positively cash flow by having that. Additionally, once the payments do start coming in, I'm basically at like a neutral cash flow. It's not going to make me money, but it's not going to lose me money. But I mean, I got into it for such a low down payment. It's like, okay, I paid $40K for a property that's worth $300 now, that in another 10 years is probably going to be worth $500,000 or $600,000. So it's like, kind of for me, it's a lot slower play than what I usually do, but it's like a really safe play, because it's like I only put $40K in and the property is, going to scale up in value. Even though after the first year, I really don't make much money. It's almost a break even for year 2. which is the opposite of most deals that I do, which Casey knows. Usually I'm losing money in the first year, and then I make quite a bit on the second year. So how is it a win for them? So yes, they get the monthly checks, not initially, but they got a 40K upfront check, which they could use for whatever they wanted. And then they start getting the monthly checks this summer. And then, but okay, so in 4%, I mean, at that time, they probably could have put it into a CD and actually done a little bit better than 4%. So how is that a win for them? Well, when you sell a property, you get taxed in a variety of different ways. You get taxed on, you know, like they bought it for 60K about a dozen years ago, and now they're selling it for 300. So that's a 240K difference. Additionally, they probably depreciated it during the time that they owned it. So that's where you get like a little deduction every year for how much you've owned it. And so the combination of those two, I mean, they would shoot up to the highest tax bracket possible, and they would have to, that 240 plus the depreciation, they'd get taxed off that. It's going to be a substantial number. However, if they do it with seller financing, now they only have to get taxed in year one on the depreciation. That's the part, from what I understand. Remember, I'm not a CPA, but from what I understand from having talked to different accountants, that's the part you can't avoid getting taxed on, is the depreciation. Well, they only bought it for 60K. The land value is, let's just say it was 20,000. So they've partially depreciated 40,000. So, okay, they're paying tax on a net gain of around 20K. And I have no idea what the actual numbers are. I'm just kind of like mental mathing it out. Okay, so cap gains on 20K, not that bad. Easily going to be covered with the 40K and then some. It's probably a pretty small amount. However, by them getting these payments every month in just, less than $2,000 a month, they're spreading it out. They never jump up to that highest tax bracket. And so they're spreading it out. They're staying in a low tax bracket. And I told them, I said, well, do you want to do like a 30-year amortization and like a 5-year term? They're like, no, we want a 10-year term. And I'm like, okay. So, like, again, it's just a really safe play for me, because usually if you've been to some of my other talks, you'll see that like I force a ton of equity into a property in a short amount of time, to the point where I can do one of two things after 12 to 18 months. I could resell it for substantially more, or I can go back to Casey and say, hey, I want to refinance this, and we can pull a bunch of money out, possibly close to all of the money back out, and have like instead of having a really high cash flowing property, have like a lower cash flowing property. And I'll kind of get into that in a little bit too. But yeah, so instead of them jumping up to high tax bracket, paying taxes on, a 20K depreciation plus a 240K improved value, now they just have to pay the taxes on the depreciation, and they'll pay a minimal amount on the improved value over the course of years, and it'll save them. My accountant, like when I just kind of ran it by him, he was doing the mental math too, and he's like, oh my God, you're saving him tens of thousands of dollars on taxes by doing it this way. So even though they probably could have earned a little bit more interest by putting it in a CD at that time, they're saving, a ton on their taxes. And the reality is the interest rates come down, those CDs aren't going to keep performing at 5% either. So any questions on the seller financing? Yeah.
To them who you were and what your credentials were and what you had to show them to make it.
Yeah, they Googled me, and like if you Google me, you're gonna see, oh, he's a coach in Verona, like he's a real estate agent. He's been to a bunch of Olympics, because like I've gone to some different Olympic games, and then like the news outlets end up, following me a little bit. So I've had different stuff published that way. I'm on a board for a nonprofit. Try for schools in the area. I mean, so they're seeing all this stuff, and they're like, okay, this guy is like a community guy. So they felt like it was a safe bet. So that the only thing they want is like, they were like, because when you look at that, I'm trying to remember the land contract addendum, there is a spot where they have the ability to ask for a credit score. and they asked, and I just I said, hey, is this going to work for you? I just did a screenshot of my, what's it called? Credit Karma. And they were like, yeah, that's good for us. Like they were good with a screenshot from Credit Karma. I mean, I told you it was pretty smooth process. I mean, but like you got to have trust both ways. Like, from what I understand, from talking to the title company about it, they said, a lender's going to put it in their stuff that if you don't, pay your property taxes, they can come back to you and say, hey, we're I don't know exactly how it works, but like pay the property taxes, we're taking the property back. Well, there's no opportunity on a land contract for that to happen. So their leap of faith every year is that I'm going to pay those property taxes on time. So I made sure that I paid my property taxes before the end of the year. They weren't actually due. Well, Madison allows you to stagger it out for a long time, but I just went ahead and paid it lump sum at the end of the year. And then I sent it over to them, just said, hey, just, I mean, they were somewhere in the Caribbean. They were just like, oh, thanks for letting us know. And that was it. So, yeah.
I don't want to have a question, but want to add on to that too, because how in doing that and showing who you are and building that rapport, how often are you talking to the sellers? Because I'm thinking back to our West Wilson one.
Yeah, because earlier this year, I offered the same thing to a different seller, and I think he would have benefited more because he bought that property in 2010, 2011, when it was like, pretty low, and he's selling, pretty close to market rate. It was off market deal. But I feel like I bought that about market. And with that one, I proposed it too. And he's like, no, I want to completely clear my hands out of it. I don't want any ability for that property to potentially come back to me. And, he just was too nervous to do it. But I think financially he would have benefited more than this other couple that did end up, doing it. But yeah, he was not interested.
Yeah, and I was actually, I've said West Wilson, but I was actually thinking Lake Point in terms of how you build rapport.
So Lake Point, yeah. So Lake Point, that one was, I don't know. We just kind of really hit it off, and that was a traditional sale. I mean, they had too much debt on it for me to be able to do it.
Yeah.
Now someone else maybe could have. Recently I heard of another, just through other, I mean, obviously I communicate with a lot of other agents like myself who do sales, but also invest. And it was a referral. I didn't realize how big it was going to be. But I gave out as a referral. It was a property up north, well out of what I'm typically willing to travel. And he had a buyer for it. And but it was like a $2 million purchase. They still had $500K of debt on it, which isn't, so it'd be basically like a 25% down payment. But yeah, that's how they did it. Like they bought it with essentially a 25% down payment to clear that. And then the remaining 75% was seller financed. So they were able to work out something with that. And that was just, I think that closed end of December. So, my only involvement in that though was I was the referral agent, and then just ended up becoming a better deal than I realized. But, but yeah, but that's another way to structure it, is like, okay, you still have this much debt on it. Well, if you're looking to buy a $2 million property, you're probably looking at coming in with about $400K already. So now can you come up with another $100K to completely get it off their books and make seller financing a possibility? I might be rounding numbers here a little bit, but that's just another way to do it. All right.
I have one question. So just for the paperwork then, land contract, is it still in the seller's name, the deed then?
No. So if you look it up, if you looked up this particular property in Madison, it's under my name. But when you look to see what the transfer was, because typically it's going to be it shows what type of transfer it is, and it's going to be help me out. What's the typical is
Warranty deed?
I think so, something like that. Does that sound right? A warranty deed? Yeah, rather than, yeah, that would be if you flipped it to an LLC. So yeah, I think a warranty deed sounds right. And you're going to see instead, it's going to say land contract. So, but no, it's under my LLC, and I did put it in an LLC.
And let me add something there. I have seen it where people have come to me and they said they had a land contract and want to finance it out. But what we've seen is the land contract is signed, but they never worked with the title company to get the change deed there too, which that can sometimes affect too if you're trying to do a refinance on the residential side, I believe. So just make sure if you're doing that you do work with the title company to get it recorded.
So when you said about them being concerned about you paying the taxes, that was just from last year, and now it's in your name, so taxes are in your name.
It's the bill came to me in the name of my LLC. But no, like every year, like that's their, like, and maybe they're not even aware of that, but that's their leap of faith on me, is that I'm going to continue to get that tax bill paid every year. Because if I don't, there's not the same language that you'd have with a lender where, hey, we're going to call your loan due if you don't pay this. There's nothing in there. Now, had they hired an attorney to add some additional language and have me sign an additional form, that might look different. But we went off the standard land
So
contract.
there's no like promissory note or anything that you had like Peter or anybody next door draft?
So he drafted the land contract.
Mm-hmm.
So
the interest rate terms are in there.
Yep, correct. Yep. And that's where it says like when they will start and what's the interest rate and what that amount will be. All that's in there. All right. Yes.
Yeah, 2 questions. Are all your properties that you own being managed by a property manager?
Correct. Yes. All of them are managed.
Okay. And then question number 2 is, when you sent out your solicitation mailer, did you say all the benefits to seller financing, like you were specifically?
No, I didn't even put that in there. All I said, I mean, they were, it's kind of standard, mailers just saying, hey, if you're looking to sell a property, reach out, here's my number, that kind of thing. So no, nothing specific to that. Can you guys see the spreadsheet okay? This is back to the owner occupied version. Okay, so we're going all the way back to what Casey was talking about. Now, this is a little bit different spreadsheet than if you've come to some of my other sessions. It's a little bit different for one reason. So like, this is like my standard spreadsheet right here. Are they all bumping up to 125? Okay, good. So because I own it, I put this in here because I want, if I'm working with someone who's going to own or occupy a place, I want them to be able to see, well, I add this column and I add this column. I want them to see, because it's going to negatively cash flow. Well, probably. Unless you buy a 4-unit and the rents are really ramped up. So, but the negative cash flow is your rent. Like that's the thing. You would have already been paying rent. So we need to factor, what does that look like? So this is, there was a couple I was working with recently on helping them get into a multifamily with a 5% conventional down payment, which was a new program at the time. And these were numbers that we ran on some different properties. So if we'll look at this one, for example, so here was the asking price. Here was the unit, it's 2 units, so it was a duplex. Both sides were 2-bed, 2-bath with a 2-car garage. That was the city assessment. I only factor in the city assessment because it gives you a gauge of like, how much the property taxes are probably going to go up on the next year. So this was the rent. This was the rent that it was getting at the time. This is where we felt the rents could be on the next cycle. But this kind of allows us to compare. So then, everything in a different color is auto-populated. So, again, we're factoring in the same types of things that the lenders are with the 3% vacancy, 5% down payment. That's where it kind of plugs these numbers because they're going with a 30-year fixed program. It's a 30-year amortization interest rate. So that was the interest rate. That's kind of the interest rate of where things are at right now. After you add on some of those the adjustments that Casey was talking about earlier. And obviously you don't have property management fee yet, but if you move out, you will. And that's why we have to factor that in. It's like, hey, what does it look like if you move out? So in this example up here, if they were to move out immediately, it currently negatively cash flows by almost 7,000. And with the rents that we think are pretty easily achievable, it negatively cash flows 5,000. Well, you'd be expecting that if you put such a low down payment on it. But when you look at the rents, it's like, okay, they'd be paying their rent would be $1,700 a month. And if you increase the rents the next year, you'd be at $1,620. Well, does it make sense to rent at $1,620 when you could, if the next person bought it and you could apply to rent for $1,500? Okay, well, let's think about that. You're paying an extra $120 a month, but now you're the owner. You're having principal paid down every month, partially by yourself and partially by the other side. The principal pay down on something like this in the first year is probably around $5,000. By year 2 or 3, it's probably around $6,000. So the amount of principal that's getting paid down every year is benefiting you. Plus, if we do another column on this and say, okay, well, if rents right now are this, and we think next year they're going to be this, what are they going to look in another 2 or 3 years? Well, it's, maybe $1,650. So now you do that, and now you're actually paying below market value to be the owner. And if you move out, it does positively cash flow now. If you self-manage, that is, if you hire property management, it still does not yet cash flow. But this kind of gives you an idea of what this kind of looks like over time. So this is the tool that I use when I'm working with an investor who plans to own or occupy a multifamily, so that they can get a good sense of what this looks like for them. And then of course, here's the other thing. Okay, interest rate right now on this is 6.5. Fast forward, fast forward another 2-3 years, and let's say we're down to 5.5. Now what does it look like? Okay, well, check this out. Now your rent just went down to $1,250. And if you moved out, you're making almost $5,000 if you self-manage, and you're making $835 even if you have a property management. So you're basically, even with property management, you're breaking even, but the tenants are paying down your principal, they're paying your expenses. So there's a lot of benefits there. But these are things that I do just to kind of show people like, hey, this is where it looks like right now. Here's what I think it will look like next year. And hey, let's play around with it. Like, hey, let's look at a best case scenario. Let's look at worst case scenario is if you do conventional, the interest rate can't go up on you. So that's just another tool that I use. Any questions on this spreadsheet? And the main goal there is just to kind of show you what that looks like on the owner occupy version. All right, so Casey earlier used my example from Harriet Street. So I just wanted to show you again what that kind of looked like to me. So when we were looking at this, we were saying, okay, purchase price of $465. And here the current rents was extremely low. So even after the 20% down payment, 8% property management, yeah, it was going to lose $7,700 a year. So it's like, okay, well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But it was way under rented. We thought we could get the rents to $5,000. We thought in order to do that, we'd have to put $50,000 into the property. So now you kind of fast forward here, you got all the anticipated expenses. Well, cash flow after property management is now up to 12 grand. So look at that big swing from getting the rents, super under rented to getting them at rent or at value. The other great thing about this is, well, hey, if I've improved the property, I thought that the after repair value would be $650,000. So that means if Casey allows me to pull 80% of the equity out, that means not only can I get my original $465 back plus the $50K back, but I can take an extra, if I want, I can take an extra $5,000 out so I can get all of that money back and keep financing it. And if I do that and I finance the 470, check it out. It still cash flows about $5,000 a year and I got all my money back and I can use that to purchase the next thing, you know, and that's obviously one of the perks of commercial financing is you can go ahead and do things like that and be a little bit more aggressive. Here's the even better news, as Casey showed. So this was the projected, and now we've got the actual. Well, we actually got the rents up to 5,100, and based on and so you run all these numbers again, and you know it's just a little bit higher version of it. Well, now we're looking at this upcoming spring, and we're like, hey, we think we can get the rents up to 54.45 because we got everybody in so quickly at the other rents. So now, like, okay, well, if we refinance this, here's the one thing I mentioned that didn't turn out quite as good. I ended up putting $80,000 into it instead of $50,000. So we just went all out. We ended up putting central AC in each of the units, which needed an electrical upgrade. And so it just got a little bit more expensive than we anticipated. But, you know, with all that considered, if I got an evaluation of 681,250 on the money, I can pull all that equity back out. It'd be a loan amount of, I got to go back to that. Sorry. Loan amount of 545, and it would still cash flow about 4,000 a year. And it would put 545K back in my pocket, over $500,000 back in my pocket, which I could use for a down payment on the next property and keep it going. This is that snowball effect I was talking about before. You know, it wasn't this easy when I first started, but eventually you get to a point where your properties can now buy you more properties, you know, and that's kind of the key there. All right, so now I'll get to the East Lawn. So it sounded like this amazing deal, but like I said, this is really a slow play deal. It's not nearly as good of a deal as what I just talked about right now. Purchase price 300, after repair value 300. I bought it at market price, but got a 4% interest rate. I only had to put 40K down, which is, like I said, about 12%. At current rents, that would lose me $6,500 a year. But instead, I end up banking everything because I'm not paying anything for the first 11 months. So if I can get the rents to this 2280, I'll make a whopping $295 a year. All right. But like I said, this isn't a cash flow deal. This is like a slow play deal. I now own a property that's completely with minimal down payment. That's completely paid off by the tenants. And in another 10 years, when our deal is up, I own something that will likely be probably close to double of what it is now. Yeah.
But like, you're not needing a porch on that probably. I mean, you checked everything out in 10 years. It doesn't need.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm sure there'll be capital improvements here and there, but like I'll make up for the cash flow of other properties. If this was my only property, but that's the other thing I learned in doing this, because one of the things I always attempted to do with people that have larger 20, 30 unit apartment buildings, anytime I've run into them, I was like, oh, let's do a seller finance deal. And they're like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that, yada, yada, yada. Well, now having done this whole experience, I'm like, well, dang, at 10% down, even a really low interest rate, like you're really breaking even. Like if you want it to cash flow, you got to put a little bit more money into it. Even if it's just 15%, that changes it quite a bit. So that was a good experience. And that's part of the reason I wanted to do it on this smaller property, because I wanted to hey, this will be my experiment. I'll see how this goes. And that will help me to decide how to do the next one. Plus, these guys love this. They think it's great. So if I run into somebody and I'm having a hard time convincing them on the seller financing, and they seem, warm to the idea, but they can't quite get over the hump. Call these guys up, see what they think about it. And then they're going to be like, that's part of the reason I'm trying to do such a good job is so that they're such a raving fan that if anybody called them up, they would say, oh yeah, seller financing. Like, oh, you want to do that with Joff? Oh yeah. Why wouldn't you do that? He's saving us tens of thousands on our taxes every year on a 300K property. How much is he going to save you on your $3 million property? So that's kind of how that one goes. All right. I'll get back to the slides because we are almost done. And all right. So this is why I always like to bring, I did this one when interest rates, the year interest rates went from 3 to 6.5. I did a whole session on investing in challenging times. And I do like to hit on this because we're always in challenging times. Okay. The reasons not to buy are always clear and right in front of us. And the reasons to buy are often not clear for another 1 to 2 years. This is why so many people wait to take action. So if you look at all these times, this is what people were telling you during these time frames. 2008 to 2012 is a perfect example. Properties are losing value every year. Don't buy now. When I bought in 2011, I had so many people saying, are you crazy? You're going to buy this property. Don't you know it's going to be worth less next year? Just buy it next year when it's worth less. That's when you want to buy it. Don't buy it now. Now, every time I tell somebody that I bought my first rental property in 2011, oh, that was so smart. I wish I would have done that. Oh, but at the time, everybody telling it was, so think about this. Everybody at the time was telling me I was an idiot. Now everybody says I'm so smart. Take it all the way to 2021. Prices are too high. Wait for the prices to come down. It's not, there's no way this is going to keep going. And I could go over each one, but let's go over the first and the last. 2008 to 2012, we all know now properties were at discount prices that we might never see again in our lifetime. And even if we had a similar market crash now, which seems very unlikely, but if that were to happen, there's no way we go back to the prices of 2008, 2012. 2021, interest rates are at record lows and rent prices are going up quickly. I wish I would have bought a lot more property in 2021. I just wasn't doing as good a job of finding the deals that year. So again, the reason to not buy now, everybody's telling you. It's in the news. That's what your friends and family are telling you. And they're saying, wait, it's going to get better later. It's always going to get better later, But if you always look back, and I just did a seminar down in Orlando last week, and I was talking to real estate agents all the way from like newer agents all the way up to, very experienced agents who do many, many deals. And, I was saying, if you go back to last year and you look through the MLS and you look at what rental properties got purchased and the price they got purchased for, you'll probably find some where you're like, well, I'm not sure if that was a good idea or not. But I challenge you to go back 5 years and find one deal that you're like, oh yeah, I wouldn't have bought. If I could go back in time, I wouldn't buy that at that price. And if you go back 10 years, you're definitely not going to find that. Like it's just not possible. So the reality is, if you can make it happen now, you're in a better position to do it now. And getting an average deal today is better than getting a home run deal in 2 years, because you have that much more experience, you have that much more tax benefits, all those different things. Okay. So action steps for first-time investors: interview and hire a real estate agent or team that has experience with investment real estate. Ideally, a person that owns some investment real estate and has already experienced what you're trying to do. Talk to a lender and discuss options, and we have a couple lenders here with different options for each. Set up an MLS search for properties that fit your price range, and start analyzing properties and having discussions with your agent. And the great thing is, all of these first steps don't cost anything. You don't have to pay for anything at that point. And then recommended books: Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's a very good mindset book. Millionaire Real Estate Investor, really good in terms of, what types of things you should be doing. Bigger Pockets podcast, they're also on YouTube. Really, really great. And well, this is from another one, but it is a good book on the BRRRR strategy. All right, all of our contact information is right there. Really appreciate you guys coming in and staying a little bit extra. Yeah, thanks so much for coming. Really appreciate it. We're going to end with the surveys. So if you could finish your surveys and get them to Shelly before you head out, we will do a drawing. We'll draw for both of these books. Again, really appreciate you coming in, and thanks for taking the time.